All right, everyone, you want to get back into it?
Sure.
We are just at the end of the From Rags to Riches section, part 4. Let me just review very quickly what we've gone through. Joseph, son of Jacob, the 11th out of 12 sons, gets sold into slavery. He is in Potiphar's house. He gets in trouble with Potiphar's wife, even though he didn't do anything wrong. Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him. Joseph gets thrown in prison. While in prison, he once again is a very commendable character. He's a hard worker. He's honest, trustworthy, so he gets put in charge of pretty much the entire prison. He is assigned specifically to 2 of the prisoners who are a little more high profile. You have the cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh. They both have dreams. He interprets their dreams. They both come true. The cupbearer is restored to his position, and the cupbearer forgets about Joseph, even though he was supposed to remind Pharaoh that Joseph was in prison for reasons that should not have put him in prison in the first place. So then the last lesson, we looked at Pharaoh's dreams. Could somebody remind all of us the 2 dreams Pharaoh had?
Seven healthy cows. No, the 5 healthy cows and the 7, right? 7 healthy cows, 7 sickly cows, 7 shocks of good grain, and the 7 shocks of withered grain.
And what did the 7 gaunt, skinny cows and the 7 wind-blown heads of grain do to the healthy ones?
Consumed them, ate them up.
Swallowed them up. So strange dreams, kind of similar dreams. Pharaoh's a little disturbed. He brings all of his magicians and his enchanters in, and they can't figure out what the exact meaning of this is. That's when the cupbearer remembers, hey, when I had a dream in prison, this Hebrew kid was able to interpret it for me. It came true. Pharaoh, you probably should have him come in because he seems to have a special talent. So Pharaoh brings him in. Joseph gets a change of clothes, gets a shave. He is brought before Pharaoh. And what's interesting about this last lesson was that Joseph continued to give glory to the Lord, even though he had a chance to self-promote a little bit. He had a chance to say, hey, look what I could do. I should not be in prison. I should be in your employ. He still gives credit to the Lord again and again and again. He even says, I can't do it, but the true God can, and here's the meaning of your dreams. What was the meaning of the dream? Could someone summarize that for us?
7 years of plenty and then 7 years of extreme hardship.
Yep, and specifically as far as crops go, and then followed by famine. And the famine is going to be so severe. The 7 years of drought and no food is going to be so bad that the 7 years of abundance leading up to it is not even going to be remembered. It's going to be that horrible. Joseph says, this is my suggestion. You probably should set someone up to take care of this. You take 1/5 of the produce for 7 years and you set it aside because you're going to have to save something and have something in hand when these 7 years of famine come. Otherwise, it's going to be ugly. Pharaoh says, well, you could interpret the dream. It sounds pretty legitimate. I don't know anyone who would be more qualified to be this guy than you. Joseph, you are now second in command in all of Egypt. And he ended up giving Joseph a wife. He gives him his signet ring. And now Joseph goes, as we see from the lesson title, from rags to riches within a day. Now he has everything under his control. One of the interesting questions that we talked about on page 15, if you have the pages in front of you on screen or printed out was this: why does the Lord sometimes allow famines and earthquakes and other natural disasters to not only disrupt the lives of people on this earth, but destroy thousands of lives? I'm throwing that out to you to answer, so we can talk about it one more time, since we are in the middle of this kind of a unique thing in our lifetimes with the coronavirus. On your marks, get set, someone answer.
Bring us closer to him. Strengthen our faith.
Yeah, if you remember the why does the Lord allow pandemics thing I sent out last week, that was one of the points. We see from the Bible that the Lord uses these awful situations to steer his children closer to him, to make us pray to him, to force us to rely on him, to make sure that our priorities are in order. What other reasons does the Lord allow these things to happen?
To protect us, because sometimes the people that die would have done us harm.
Good. So we saw that too with the examples in that article a week and a half ago about things like Pharaoh. The Lord sent 10 plagues against the Egyptians, and Pharaoh, number one, to punish them, but number two, to rescue his people. And so there are a lot of times where the Lord uses these natural disasters to actually save the people that he cares about. Others?
Sometimes it's to discipline us.
Yes. Thank you, Jim. We see that in the Bible too, that there are multiple examples of the Lord slapping us across the face to get our attention so that we understand, I probably should do some self-evaluation here. Make sure that I'm repenting of my sinfulness and relying on the Lord for my forgiveness.
Maybe create more opportunities for people to hear his word.
Yes. Hopefully that is happening right now in the situation that we are all dealing with in our country and in this world, that there are more opportunities to share God's word with other people, and there are more specific there's more of an impetus for other people to seek out God's word and to try to figure out this whole religion thing, that maybe we should at least look into it. If people are getting sick, if people are dying, and it's not just the coronavirus either. You've seen the news feeds where you have earthquakes and tornadoes and people are dying in all kinds of different ways right now. That has to wake some people up. The Lord uses these kinds of natural disasters for that all the time.
And I think the biggest thing is to turn our eyes heavenward, to get us to more fully hope in that which is to come. Easy to say when life is good, but that's how I look at it. And that the tragedies, maybe the shortness of life, will help people turn to Jesus. To segue from the last comment.
And that's not just a nice segue from the last comment. That's a nice segue into what the sermon's going to be about this Sunday, as we're looking ahead to a sure and confident hope of our inheritance in heaven. I mean, that's exactly what these kinds of situations do for those of us who believe in Jesus as our Savior, and for those that we share this message with. We haven't mentioned anything yet about the reason God might allow natural disasters to end the life of a Christian. Why would he do that? Why would he let a Christian, for example, get the coronavirus and go on a ventilator and suffer for 2 weeks before dying? Why would the Lord ever put one of his children through that?
To me, to die is gain.
In Philippians, Paul specifically says, I know I have work to do here, but to die is even better. to go to Christ and see him face to face is the ultimate goal. That's also what we're going to be looking at this Sunday. Peter says in the first chapter of his first letter, the goal of our faith is salvation in heaven. That's what we're always looking forward to. And so when a Christian dies, whether it's a tragic way or a non-tragic way, for me, it's hard to be too sad for them. They're in heaven. How can I be sad about that? I might be sad for the people that person has left behind because it's a hard thing. It's a
Yeah.
struggle to go through a situation where your loved ones are no longer there. But when a person reaches heaven, that's a celebration. I mean, congratulations, you finally made it. And what a glorious day that is for that Christian. So yeah, the Lord takes them to heaven because that's where he wants them ultimately anyway.
I think sometimes even when people are dying or really, really, really sick like that, sometimes it's an opportunity for the people around them too, because often when people are dying that are Christians, they say and do things even when they're really, really, really sick that can show their faith, and that makes the other people around them think about it and maybe even come to faith because then they talk about it, even though the person's really sick.
It's one of those examples, thanks, Nikki, that the Lord encourages us to always be ready to share our faith in and out of season, he says. Well, this is one of those situations when a Christian is on their deathbed, when a Christian is experiencing some severe difficulties in life. What an excellent opportunity to share your faith and what you know to be true. And when the nurses around you, when the family members, when visitors see what you are doing and hear what you are saying and can observe the Christian attitude that you're displaying, that's one of those great testaments to the Lord and his promises that you might not ever get other than when you are dealing with these situations.
Sometimes I think God uses those times for other people to be able to serve those who are in need,
Yeah.
the family members or the person itself, if they're able to receive care. He uses those as opportunities for service.
I've talked a lot about that when I've visited elderly Christians who are kind of on their last legs. And now they're in their home or they're in a nursing home or they're in a hospital bed, and they kind of complain about, I can't do anything anymore. I used to work in this field, or I used to do all these things outside, or I used to do this with my hands, and whatever it may be, I physically can't do it anymore. So why am I still here? I kind of feel worthless. Well, number one, I say to them what you said, Penny. Well, now you are the object for other Christians to serve you. And I know that's maybe a little bit frustrating, and I think it would probably be frustrating for all of us at first. But it's important for Christians to have an object to serve. Well, you're the object to serve now. That's a good thing. And number two, your main duty right now as a Christian, if you physically can't do much, is to pray. So I tell Christians all the time who are in bed, you now have an opportunity to do something that the Lord loves, that I personally don't always have a lot of time to do, and that is to pray to him. You have more time than you've ever had before. Use it, and use it wisely. It's a very God-pleasing thing to do because the Lord not only wants you to pray, he promises to hear everything that you have to say. So keep that in mind too as you deal with some of the elderly people around you. And as you yourself get older and older, you are never going to be worthless. There's never going to come a point where you're in this world and the Lord just can't use you anymore. Prayer is a huge part of a Christian's life, and a lot of times at the end of life, that's when you get to pray the most. Any other thoughts or comments on this question? If not, we left Joseph as he is given a wife given the second command. He is now on top of the world, so to speak, and he is now going to be in charge. So now on page 17, if you have your notes, or on the screen in front of you, we're going to read Genesis chapter 41. Someone tell me here if you're going to be able to see this on my screen. See that or not? Or do you still see the PowerPoint slide that just says Genesis 41?
It turned yellow to white.
I just
We
see
just-
Genesis 41.
Yeah, same thing.
I wonder how I got it up the first time on some of your screens. I have to keep trying to work with it.
Yeah, Pastor, when you share your screen, sometimes you have to pick this is the screen that you're sharing.
Mhm.
So that's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
But if you pick there's one screen that will share everything. You just have to find that right one.
All right. I'll figure that out later. Thanks, Jen. Genesis chapter 41, either listen closely, follow along in your own Bible, follow along in the sheets if you have them printed out or on your screen. Here we go. We're starting in verse 46 of Genesis 41. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvests. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of famine arrived. Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest at On, bore them to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh and said, God has made me forget all my hardship and my whole family. And the second son he named Ephraim and said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end. And the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every land, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. Then the whole land of Egypt was stricken with famine. The people cried out to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all Egypt, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. Now the famine had spread across the whole region, so Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Every land came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, for the famine was severe in every land. The one part that I have highlighted for you on this section is that Joseph was 30 years old when he began to serve Pharaoh as the second in command. Do you remember how old he was when he was sold into slavery?
17.
17.
17. That's correct. I am no math whiz, but I believe that would be around 13 years. 13 years in prison, more or less. I mean, he was with Potiphar in his house, but he's still a slave serving him. So 13 years of doing some tough work. 13 years of waiting. 13 years of trying to deal with the situation in which he was unfairly put in. That's a long time. So now Joseph finally realizes what the Lord had been talking about when he gave him those dreams so long before. My first question is this: what do the names of Joseph's sons reveal about his faith? Manasseh means forget. Ephraim means twice fruitful. What are your thoughts?
Your screen updated, by the way.
Yeah, you have a question on there now?
Yeah.
Yep, it's because I'm back to PowerPoint.
But it reflects something that we often don't do, and that's when things go well for us, we take credit for it, whereas Joseph gave God all the credit for his good fortune.
That's part of the fun thing about these Old Testament stories. Almost every Old Testament name has a specific meaning. It's not like names today where you go online and you say, hey, what's the meaning of the name James? When they named a person James or they named a person Manasseh, they meant it for a very specific reason. So you're right, Jim. Joseph gives credit to the Lord, and the names of his sons are going to be a constant reflection of what he went through and also what he believes. Other comments on this?
He felt like the Lord was helping him and taking care of him. And so he was able to name his sons something that reflected how he felt, like he was willing to forgive. I mean, a lot of times we just hold on to things and we don't do that. And he was able to recognize that, those were good things and blessings that God enabled him to do.
And that's going to be a recurring theme throughout the rest of these chapters. We'll keep coming back to that. Joseph's ability to forgive and his ability to realize that, yeah, it was terrible. Yeah, I did not like it. However, the Lord used this for the good of his people and to carry out his ultimate plan. He's going to say that very specifically to his brothers, in fact.
What strikes me is his relationship with God. God has made me forget, and God has made me fruitful. And even that God knows the interpretation of dreams, like he really had a close relationship with God, it seems.
And isn't that surprising? When you see the first part of the story, and Joseph is a spoiled brat, and he's ticking people off left and right, and he gets thrown into a pit, and they take his coat, and maybe in our minds we think, yeah, he deserved it. He needs a little bit of that. But now at this point, he has a strong faith. It's amazing how mature his faith is after going through 13 years as a slave and in prison. I mean, that would make a lot of people bitter. That would turn a lot of people away from their Lord. But the Lord knew that this was not too much for Joseph to handle. In fact, it would work the opposite direction. It helped strengthen his faith so that Joseph wasn't spoiled anymore. In fact, he's going to appreciate every little thing that he gets.
Yeah, I expect that for those 13 years, he really didn't have any means of nourishing his faith. He didn't have any resources available other than the stories that he learned when he was a child that he clung to. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it comes back to a point that we touched on a couple lessons ago, and that's Joseph demonstrates a faith here, and it must have been passed down to him by Jacob. Even though Jacob doesn't come out as the best kind of father with the favoritism that he shows, he at least passed down the stories of God's word to his boys. Otherwise, Joseph wouldn't know any of this. He wouldn't cling to it so much. It wasn't just a passing story either. I mean, to have his faith cling to the Lord for 13 years in a terrible situation, at least Jacob did something right. And this is another nice reminder for us too, that God's word works. The Lord's word is sometimes described as a seed in the ground. Jesus gives us that parable about the sower sowing seeds, and you have different types of soil and it grows up. Well, that picture also works with this. Sometimes a seed lies dormant in the ground for a while, and it might seem dead. And it might not seem like anything is happening. And in fact, people might forget about it. But then it blossoms. Then it grows at the Lord's time and in the Lord's way. Sometimes it happens with the word too. That the word can remain in the heart of a person longer than we might think it actually does, because we don't see any fruit. We don't see any results from it. But the word of God works. We see that here in Joseph too.
Joseph, during those 13 years, Joseph was pretty much, even though he was in prison, he was put in charge. So he should have realized also that the Lord was with him in the fact that he really wasn't beaten, or the Lord took care of him all those 13 years.
Certainly, as he looks back on his life, he is going to say that to his brothers, that the Lord is behind it. He's working everything out to carry out his plan. It's okay. Whether he was completely confident of that fact while he was in the middle of it, we don't really know, but you're right, Jim. Joseph had a decent understanding that no matter what was happening to him, the Lord can work this out and will work this out for his good. And eventually, 13 years later, it happened. The second question for you on that page is write down the 3 most important responsibilities God has personally given you in your life right now. This is to help you consciously think about the station in life that the Lord has set you. What are the main responsibilities I've been given? Now, how can I carry them out to the best of my abilities? You don't necessarily have to give me your list, but I want you to at least think of them, if not write them down.
So you're going to give us your list as an example?
There you go. I don't know if that's in order or not. I kind of put them on the same plane. Now, certainly I am also a son of my parents. I'm a brother to my brothers. I'm a citizen of this country. I have different responsibilities that have to do with being a pastor. So I'm the chairman of the district mission board. That's a responsibility. But if I need to pick my top 3 right now, it's right there. And that's always a balancing act, of course, just like it should be a balancing act in your life. Whatever 3 important responsibilities you pick, you have to balance it. Sometimes, for me, being a father is going to take a little more time out of my day. Sometimes husband, sometimes pastor, it just depends. And so that was tough for me, certainly early on in my ministry. Early on in my ministry, that far right category by far was on top. And probably the left category, father, was too far down the list. And so I've tried over the past few years to try to even that out a little bit. That doesn't mean that you have to spend an equal amount of time on each responsibility. That doesn't mean each category of what the Lord has tasked you with is going to take the exact same amount of effort. But you do want to make sure that you are carrying out the responsibilities the Lord has given you to the best of your abilities. So if you are a student, that should take up most of your time, because that's your main job right now. If you are retired and you're just living with your spouse, maybe being a husband or a wife to your spouse, maybe that is by far your top priority, or should be your top responsibility. So if you have these 3 responsibilities on a piece of paper or in your head, try to make sure you put time into it. You got to put some effort into it. Just as Joseph is putting effort into the responsibilities that the Lord was giving him throughout his life. And of course, they change. What do you want to say about that? Going once, going twice. Picture of Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. He is pointing to 2 symbols of the dreams. On the left-hand side, you can see there the stalks of grain. On the right-hand side is the cattle. Pharaoh in the middle there, trying to figure out what is going on. Another picture, similar scene, different artist's interpretation. Joseph in front of Pharaoh, letting him know what his dreams mean. This is, once again, just kind of visuals so that the story itself kind of sticks in our mind a little bit better. Part 5 is called the confrontation. Joseph's brothers are going to see Joseph for the first time in many, many years. We're reading from Genesis chapter 42, the first 10 verses. When Jacob learned that there was no grain in Egypt, that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? Listen," he went on, "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we will live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. The sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was in charge of the country. He sold grain to all its people. His brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan to buy food," they replied. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness of the land." "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food," they said. You'll notice in the story at the end of the first paragraph in verse 4, Jacob does not send Benjamin with them because he doesn't want anything to happen to him. Now, if you remember, Jacob has 12 sons, but they're from 4 different women, 2 sisters, and then the 2 sisters' servants, handmaids. Joseph is born to Jacob's favorite, Rachel. The only other child Rachel conceives and gives birth to is Benjamin. So now that Joseph is gone, or at least Jacob thinks he is gone, Benjamin's the last son that he has from his favorite wife. So even after all these years, he's still showing considerable favoritism to one brother over the others. I can't imagine that was a good family dynamic for Benjamin or the rest of the brothers, or even Jacob for that matter. At the end of the second paragraph in verse 7, Joseph recognizes his brothers, but he treats them like strangers and speaks harshly to them. Do you think that's just to test them, as we're going to see a little bit later? Or is his initial sight of his brothers, does that bring out Do you think it brought out some hard feelings and he's still a little bit angry at them? Or do you think it's not anger at all, he's just testing? What are your thoughts?
I think that's the only way he could keep it together. Because probably was overwhelming to see them.
We'll see in these next pages that Joseph can't always control his emotions in front of his brothers. So he definitely is affected by this.
I'm kind of surprised that they wouldn't recognize him.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Hold on to that thought, Jim.
Okay.
Well, I'll just mention here, Neil had chatted an answer to keep from being recognized. He doesn't seem to want to be recognized yet. And as we go through the story, he seems to be wanting to test them first, to see how they act, to see what they say, to see what they're going to do. Have they changed over the years? Or are they still the bitter, resentful, hateful, murderous brothers that he once knew? So he's trying to feel them out a little bit and see what the group dynamic is with the brothers right now. As far as not being able to recognize him, I guess we can mention this right now. I was going to save it for later, but remember, he's 17 when he's sold. So he's still a kid, so to speak. He was 30 when he began to rule for Pharaoh. Then there were 7 years of abundance. And now we're in the 7-year phase of famine. And we don't know within this second 7-year phase when Jacob's sons come down to Egypt. Whether it's the first year or second or third, we don't know. I mean, we would, I guess, assume it might be the first year because you have a famine for a year and you're going to need food. So let's say it's the first year for the sake of argument. That's still over 20 years. They had not seen Joseph in over 20 years. So not only is he going to be changed a little bit physically in his appearance, but he's been a slave for 13 years and sometimes in dungeons. So it's not as if he was taken care of very well for 13 of those years. Number 2, he's probably dressed like an Egyptian. He's in Egypt. He's not going to be dressing like a Hebrew. And number 3, as we're going to see later, he's not speaking to them in Hebrew or Aramaic. He's using an interpreter. So they speak. An interpreter interprets it for him, even though he can understand them. And so all of this kind of combined, his physical appearance, just like an Egyptian, the number of years, 20 plus, that they hadn't seen him, the fact that he's using an interpreter, and probably the fact that they didn't expect to ever see him. They thought he had died 20 years ago. So why would they ever think, or would it ever pop in their mind that this guy would be their brother? So I would guess because of all those reasons, there's no way they're going to recognize him unless, he did something or said something to let them in on the secret. Your question?
Well, I was just thinking that the Hebrews probably had long shoulder-length hair, maybe facial hair, and Joseph probably, like Yul Brynner, was bald, and so they'd probably look quite a bit different.
It is tough to kind of guess exactly what Joseph is going to look like at this point, but we do know that they're going to be dressed differently. We do know from other parts of the Bible that later on, at least, the Egyptians are clean shaven. We don't know about this time period. And the Israelites will eventually have the beards. But remember, this is the early stage of the Israelite nation. It's not even a nation yet. They're just Jacob's sons. So I'm not quite sure if they're all sporting beards at this point or not. But yeah, I would agree with you in general, Jim, that certainly the cultural difference is gonna make Joseph look a lot different than whatever they remembered him as. But after these 20 years, how are Joseph's dreams similar to the promises that God gives to us? Joseph's dreams, not Pharaoh's.
Well,
Joseph. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
just as God had Joseph's dreams were, God made promises to him, Joseph, in his dreams, and he kept those promises. And just the same way, he gives us promises, and we can count on him keeping those promises too.
Nice. Shelley, what were you going to say? Same thing or something different?
There's a verse that God does nothing without revealing it to his servants, the prophets. He showed Joseph what was going to happen in the future, and that had to really be pretty cool to see it being fulfilled.
Yeah.
And we know, I mean, from God's word, what's going to happen and that he's going to save us. So even if we have hardships and trials, we know he's going to save us. He promised never leave us or forsake us. He's with us always.
We can bank on God's promises, can't we?
Yeah.
And those dreams that God gave Joseph when Joseph was young were promises. They weren't just predictions. They were promises. We can always bank on God's promises because, as you see in the answer, they're guarantees. Joseph knew from the very start, the Lord is someday going to put me in a position where my parents and my brothers are going to bow down to me. He's going to do it. He promised to do it. Those same promises we can bank on today. Now, obviously, the Lord doesn't give you a promise that people are going to bow down to you, but he gives you promises all over the pages of the Bible that you truly can't take to the bank, that you know they're going to happen. Might not happen as soon as you'd like. Might not happen the way that you'd like, but the Lord will come through for you because that's what he does. Moving on. Starting at verse 11, Genesis chapter 42. We are all sons of one man, the brothers say. We are honest. Your servants are not spies. No, he said to them, you have come to see the weakness of the land. But they replied, we, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living. Then Joseph said to them, I have spoken, you are spies. This is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one from among you to get your brother. The rest of you will be imprisoned, so that your words can be tested to see if they are true. If they are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. So Joseph imprisoned them together for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, I fear God. Do this and you will live. If you are honest, let one of you be confined to the guardhouse, while the rest of you go and take grain to relieve the hunger of your households. Bring your youngest brother to me so that your words can be confirmed. Then you won't die. And they consented to this. Joseph initially says, you know what, send one from your group back to get your brother, and then you can return. And then he puts them in prison for 3 days to let them sit on it. After 3 days, he says, you know what, I changed my mind. You don't send one, I want one stand here, and the rest of you go back and bring back your brother. So it's kind of a change in plans here. He must have thought it over and said, you know what, they have families, they have kids. I don't want to keep all of them here. We'll just keep one of them here, and we'll see what they do. So it's kind of interesting how Joseph is testing them a little bit, and that's what the first question is. What do you think Joseph's intentions were with the command he gave to his brothers?
I kind of think about what Neil said. He didn't want to be revealed himself yet. It's like he's still winging it. He's not sure what to do. So I don't know.
What does he want to find out from his brothers?
Did he want to find out that his brothers had repented or were sorry for what they had done?
That's possible. That's very possible. Remember what they did to him. It's not like they were just mean to him. It's not like they were bullies when they were younger and they kind of beat him up like sometimes big brothers do to their little brothers. I mean, they talked about murdering him. They sold him as a slave. That's cold-hearted. I'm sure Joseph wanted to see if they were still that way. Because if that was the case, then he didn't want to deal with them. What other intentions do you think he might have had?
I think he wanted to know if Benjamin was still alive. I think that I remember maybe from a previous Bible study on Joseph that he was very close to Benjamin and that and they also wanted to see his father, I think.
So we can guess that Benjamin's maybe 6 years younger than Joseph. So by the time Joseph is sold as a slave, Benjamin is, give or take, 11 years old. But remember, this is his only kind of full brother. He's not a half brother. He's his only full brother. He does want to see Benjamin. This is his brother from his mother. He wants to see him. And not only does he want to see him, he probably wants to see how his brothers treat Benjamin too, wouldn't you think? If they treated him so horribly, he probably wants to see if Benjamin is being treated the same way. So bring your brother Benjamin here, and I want to see him, and I want to talk to him, and we're going to get to the bottom of this.
It makes sense now why he was so close to his dad, because his mom died giving birth to Benjamin. So he was only maybe 10 or 11 or younger than that when his mom died. So that's probably why Jacob was so close to or protective of him and Benjamin, because they didn't have a mom.
Yep. Joseph could have been as young as 6 when his mother died, giving birth to Benjamin. So he didn't know his mom a whole lot. Jacob loved Rachel more than any of his other wives or concubines. And so he definitely was not afraid to show his love for Joseph over and above all the rest of the boys. We will see this play out. I just posed this question now to help us think of, Where's Joseph going with this? What does he want to do here? You often hear the phrase forgive and forget. But why is forgiveness possible without forgetting what has been done? I didn't think it was that hard of a question.
I think
Go ahead.
I think that it's possible to forgive without forgetting, just simply because Jesus commands us to do it. He tells us to do it. So it's actually becomes an act of the will, rather than an act of emotion.
Good. So forgiving doesn't mean you have to feel it. Forgiving doesn't mean that you have to now all be filled with peace and love for that person. Maybe you aren't, but you forgive them. Forgiving means you're not holding it against them. You're not going to treat them any differently because of what they have done to you. You're not going to hold a grudge to them and wish them harm and wrong. You don't want to pay them back or have them suffer like you suffered. All that kind of stuff has to do with your forgiveness. But you might not forget what they did. Don't worry too much about, well, I got to forget what they did because I'm supposed to forgive them. No, that's not true. Forgiveness doesn't have to do with forgetting the fact at hand.
I think back at the storefront, you used an example. If you had a babysitter and you found out that that person had been stealing stuff out of your house, you could forgive them, but you might not use them for babysitting again.
Yeah, that's exactly the analogy that I've used in the past, Neil. Thanks for listening. And
how many years ago was that?
That was a long time ago. But yeah, that's very true. So your actions as a Christian should be forgiveness. But your actions as a Christian might also include, I don't trust you anymore because of what you've done. That's fine. That doesn't mean you haven't forgiven them. That just means, I'm going to use my Christian common sense and not hire you anymore. That happens all the time in our day-to-day lives, doesn't it? You have a plumber come over and they do a horrible job and they kind of rip you off. Well, they've wronged you and they aren't giving money back and they're not going to come back and fix it for free. You might end up saying, you know what? I forgive that person for being mean to me and not caring, but I'm not hiring them again. I'm moving on. I'm not going to hold a grudge, but I'm certainly not going to give them more money to come back over. So it is an important point. We can remember all of the bad things that happened to us and still forgive them.
So not to go too far out in the weeds, how does that compare to the last day?
That's part of the reason why we have an easier time to forgive, because we leave the ultimate judgment up to the Lord. So if that person ends up an unbeliever, the Lord will give them their just deserts, and we don't have to worry about it. He's the judge, he's the jury. It's not on our plate.
But we don't have to give an account of our sin at the last day, even though Christ paid for them.
Right. Since Christ has paid for them, we have no sins to give an account for.
Okay.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah too. And I don't know if you're going with this point, Neil, or not, so don't let me put words in your mouth. But let's say a person has wronged you and doesn't care. And this person ends up in heaven because maybe later on in life they're brought to faith in Jesus or whatever it might be, and you see them there. You are not going to say, are you kidding me? They made it there? Come on, Lord. You know what they did to me on earth. Yeah, you can't let that person in. By the time you get to heaven, not only are you going to be so thrilled that you personally are there, but when you see other people that were here with you in this world there, you're going to be so overjoyed. You truly are going to have the attitude of, that is great that you made it here. I mean, I cannot express to you how happy I am to see you and that you made it. We are going to have such a pure heart and a will that is so in line with the Lord's loving will that we will be thrilled to see people there, even if it's those people that actually hurt us in this world. That's one of the reasons why heaven is going to be such a great place. There's going to be no ill will, no grudges, no bitterness, no annoyance, nothing that is going to diminish an absolute 100% joy all the time. So like I said, Neil, I don't want to put words in your mouth if that was kind of what you're hinting at, but that reminded me of maybe that point that needed to be said.
When you use that example, Pastor, it made me think about how when I was teaching, oftentimes I'd see some student graduating at the graduation ceremony, you know, I'd see them walk across the stage and I'd think, I remember having you in class 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, and wow, you must have got it together, because you certainly weren't ready to graduate when I had you, but you must have gotten it together. And there was always a sense of celebration that, like, if they were there, they had paid the price, or in our case, Christ has paid the price.
Isn't it nice that the Lord is much more merciful than we are, much more patient, much more loving, much more compassionate? I mean, if any of us were in charge, we would thunder down, we would hammer our fist down so quickly and be so sick of people that no one would make it to heaven. Can you imagine if you had ultimate authority and supreme command and absolute power to do anything at any time whenever you wanted? Would you put up with someone like you? Would you put up with half the people in the Bible that actually made it to heaven? Is it the Lord is so patient. We see that not only in this story, but throughout the Bible, and it is something that we try to emulate. And that's why it's nice to have Joseph here as an example. It can be done. It is possible to get over severe wrong. I mean, the brothers could be accused of attempted murder. The story that we have in front of us with Joseph is a beautiful example of forgiveness, not just his, but the Lord's. Anything else on that? If not, we happen to be out of time. These Bible classes always seem to run quickly for me. But it's interesting. We'll have to pick up in the middle of chapter 42 next time and get into how logistically this is going to work out, how they're going to go back and forth and a brother and rescue a brother and rain, and the story gets even more interesting from here. Are there any final thoughts or comments before a closing prayer? Going once. Going twice.
I'll say this, it's always good to hear from everyone. So even though we can't get together, it's good to hear from everyone.
Yeah. Matt, how do we access these? You said that we can go back and look at these. How do we access them?
I put the recorded video on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
And I actually did record this one. I forgot to record last week's. I did
Okay.
press record this time though. So you
Okay.
can watch it all again and probably even hear yourself talk if you happen to ask a question or make a comment.
Oh, joy.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Thank you to our 4 East Coast friends and family that we have.
Yep.
Madison joined us from
Oh,
Ohio.
great.
Good to have all you guys tuning in.
It's a treat to be able to.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Have a good rest of the weekend. I'm sure I'll see you sometime. Let's close with prayer in the meantime. Dear Lord, it is a pleasure to dig into your word as we do often with each other, even if it is not in person. We know that your word works, always has, always will. Please continue to work on our hearts as we read your word individually as a couple, and also as we study your word in worship services and in Bible classes. Please continue to keep people safe and healthy in these kind of strenuous times for a lot of people in a lot of places, and help them realize that you are in control and you will continue to work things out for the good of your children. And that, of course, includes us. We pray these things to your glory. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
See you
you.
guys soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, Madison and Vicki and Kelly.
Bye.
Bye.
Good to have you with us.